Okay, thanks a lot, Dr. Qureshi. You're a hard act to follow, but I'm not even going to try to compete with you. So I'm basically going to confine myself to a fairly short presentation, which is what I always say, and then I seem to put people to sleep after 40 minutes, but I don't think anyone's going to allow me to get away with that. So I basically just have a number of observations to make about Canada's military mission in Afghanistan. And in point of fact, getting material to research for some of the concerns I have is not an easy thing, but much of the research is obtainable by those people who actually support the mission. There is a report recently published by the Canadian Senate, for example, called Taking a Hard Look at a Hard Mission. There is another report also recently published by the Canadian Foreign Policy, Defence and Foreign Policy Institute, which is called Canada in Afghanistan, Is It Working? And you can Google that for yourselves and get those reports. And in addition, you can also read the Senless Council's reports. You can read Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. And basically, my observations are based upon research which I've taken from those sources, as well as from a University of New Hampshire professor called Mark Herold, who also has some statistics on war casualties, which are very difficult to obtain. So I would start off by saying that whether you support the mission or whether you oppose the mission in Afghanistan, I think we are all agreed on one thing, that Canada's military mission is in crisis and nothing but bad things are actually happening right now. I think I'm close to correct if I say, I think Dr. Qureshi said 55 Canadian soldiers, possibly 56 Canadian soldiers have been killed since the mission started, and something of the order of 3,500 to 4,000 people, soldiers, have been injured. And when we say injured, we are often talking about horrific injuries, because in previous wars in Vietnam, the kind of injuries that would have killed soldiers soldiers are now capable of being reconstructed, but the injuries themselves are quite horrific, and the psychological injuries we have yet even to know the cost of that. And even at home, as you all know, the Afghanistan mission has created a lot of controversy, the issue of detainee transfers, that Canada has probably already violated the Third Geneva Convention, the 1949 Convention, which obliges occupying powers to refrain from torture, from abuse of human rights, and from summary execution. And we know that Canada has routinely passed battlefield prisoners of wars on to Afghan authorities and to the American authorities, who have abused them in the worst possible way. So that's a controversy, and there are other controversies as well. Today I heard Gordon O'Connor concerned about the fact that even the funeral expenses of Canadian soldiers are not being fully paid by the Department of Defence, which is quite amazing if you think about it. And if you add to that the Canadian soldiers who are injured, and I don't know if this has been rectified, but received a drop in pay because they were no longer eligible for the risk pay that you get on the battlefields. So there's been a number of controversies which have brought home to people very strongly here, I think, that this is a dirty war, and people, even the soldiers who go to fight, are mistreated and forgotten and humiliated when they come home. The United States is just the same thing. The Walter Reed Military Hospital, there was an expose on American TV some time ago of the conditions under which American soldiers go back to the Walter Reed Military Hospital are unbelievable. I mean, we're talking about cockroaches and rats and lack of medical support. So most of us would agree that the military mission is gone terribly wrong. And what I would like to suggest to you in the short time I have here is that there are a number of very compelling reasons to withdraw Canadian troops. And not simply to withdraw Canadian troops, but to entirely rethink the priorities of Canadian foreign policy, the kind of military alliances that we are presently affiliated with. It's not just a case of pulling out of Afghanistan. It's not just a case of reviewing what our position is in Haiti, which is also an occupation. It's a case of completely reviewing the entire orientation of Canadian foreign policy and the military partnerships that we have with the United States and with NATO. So what are some of the concerns I have about Canada's military mission? Well, to say this as quickly as possible, in my opinion, there was never a legitimate mandate for going into Afghanistan in the first place. And you may say, well, what's the point of worrying about that? We're in there already. Well, there's no point in crying over spilt milk. Well, I think there is a very important point. Because if you examine the justifications that the United States used to invade and occupy Afghanistan, they can be challenged and they can be questioned. And very briefly, what I would say that the first articles were Articles 5 and 6 of the NATO Treaty, which are very war-friendly, there's no doubt about that. And it's on the basis of the NATO treaty that the US really tried to justify it. But then the US used Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which admittedly does talk about the rights of states to defend themselves, to engage in self-defense. But if you read the accompanying text, you will find that that particular article does not allow or authorize unreasonable or excessive force, and that defense can only be, an immediately retaliatory action can only be used if there is no opportunity, as they say, to deliberate. In other words, if an attack is so sudden and overwhelming that a country has no opportunity other than to fight back, which is not the case with the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So the Article 51 was not designed to legitimize one country occupying and undergoing regime for another. It was actually designed for a country to defend itself against another state, not against another group of individuals. It's a very important point. And the United Nations Security Council 1368, which was used again by the United States to go into Afghanistan, only authorizes all available means to try to bring to justice those who committed the acts of 9/11. It is not a declaration of war. But if you want to see what a United Nations Security Council resolution of declaration of war is like, go back to Korea, or even take a look at the resolution used to allow the US to liberate Kuwait, if you want to call it that. Because whenever the United Nations resolutions authorize the use of force, they say so unequivocally. But this is not the case with 1368, and it's a misinterpretation of Article 51. So